Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is wrapped in so many layers of turbulent change. I've stopped listing them. This conversation series got going in the early days of COVID, and it was sort of COVID and climate. But now there's the information storm and so many other things. And this artificial intelligence, or as Chris Mims at the Wall Street Journal calls it, simulated intelligence. uh, he was on here recently. It's changing everything, and whether you're focused on climate or biodiversity or just maintaining civil society and democracy, you got to be thinking about this. Not to mention the possible upsides for so many things, from drug design to the energy challenge. And I've been meaning to reach out to Andrew Maynard of Arizona State, and now his colleague and collaborator on this book, Jeff Abbott, for a while, because Andrew is his project at ASU is about the future of being human, and I think about this all the time, trying to stay human in this world of rapid change. I think we all are, and so their book. Which is this recent book, which is more than a book now. It's really an app. You can freely download the book. Go to aiandtheartofbeinghuman.com, or just Google for Future of Humanity at Maynard. And you can inject the book into your AI chat bot, whichever one you're using, and it creates a new kind of experience, a new way to relate to a book, a new way to relate to the tools that AI is providing us. So here we are. And I thought a good way to start, well, I want to show you, grappling with AI in the workplace, as we all are. For me, the workplace is a play place. Also, I'm a musician. I have an album coming out. And anyone who's been toyed with Suno or some of these other things has seen the marvels of this technology. And so I'm just going to start with a little brief introduction here before we get into the book and everything else. Let's see if it works. And it's me singing a song, and then it transitions to my prompt for someone else to sing the song.
Don't know how I got here 2044. Somehow the world avoided nuclear war. Somehow the climate didn't go to hell. Somehow the Constitution never fell.
Don't know how I got here 2044. Somehow the world avoided nuclear war. Somehow the climate didn't go to hell. Somehow the Constitution never fell. Candidates for president are on the stump: Sasha Obama and Barron Trump. And that's not the weirdest thing I have to relate. They're both kind of sane and talking pretty straight. That change didn't happen on its own. Sunlight out of flare and all our circuits were blown. AI fried, satellites died. People had to live without a telephone.
So that's quite something, huh? I mean, obviously on Suno, millions of people or hundreds of thousands are using it now just to say, write me a country song about frogs or whatever. But this is actually a song I wrote, lyrics and melody. And I said, and I could hire a band, or it would take me a couple of years to create a band, to, recruit friends, get them in the studio. And it costs money. This took 25 seconds to generate this. And it generated 2 versions. So AI is here, right? And it raises so many questions, of course, because it only was able to do that because it ingested all the hit music of the last 75 years. And there you go. And that duality, the dynamic, the questions that arise are just enormous, whether it's for music or whether it's for all the other enterprises. Journalism is being fundamentally uprooted by all this stuff. So that's why I wanted to talk to you guys. And it's just great to have you back here. Let me just get that off the stage. And I thought we'd start very quickly. You have very different journeys that brought you together, both to write the book and to this question. So I thought a brief introduction of your pathways would be great. Maybe Jeff, are you? Let me make sure your audio and everything's working, and just say
It
hi.
is, yeah. I can hear you just fine. No, thank you. And
Yeah. So, and Jeff, you're in the sort of the business end of this, the venture capital and investment end, and
yes,
so how's it changing your world? What were you investing in before this?
Well, so I'm a partner at a Silicon Valley-based venture capital firm called Blitz Scaling Ventures, and it's built around a thesis described by Reid Hoffman about the Silicon Valley mentality and strategy towards building massively valuable companies that become the size of, Apple or Google in a decade. And so it's the sophisticated winner takes all approach. And so, of course, that's what's happening here in AI is people are looking to upend industries, replace them with new tools that become the incumbent in a vanishingly short period of time. And it's no surprise that that's exactly what we were looking for. And so I met Andrew because I started a community called AI Salon, which has now scaled to almost 70 cities around the world. And Andrew was kind enough to come out and speak to our group in Phoenix and really just held everyone in the palm of his hands. I began to build a conversation and a relationship with him because many of the things he was talking about were things that I was hearing as I traveled around the world and went to events. People were coming on the surface for transactional things, the startup looking for an investor, the corporate looking for a vendor, or the software company looking for developers to onboard. Everybody apparently was coming to meet someone that could help them, but deeper down, this conversation about what does this mean for all of us was hard to miss. And it came out in the one-to-one conversations. At one point, I raised my hand and said, what are the things you're most interested that we could bring to bear in a setting like this? And to my great surprise, most hands in the room went up when I said, help in thinking about developing a personal roadmap. Where is this taking all of us, irrespective of our current role? And so that really cemented it for me. And that's when Andrew and I began talking more seriously about the overlapping areas of interest.
And Andrew, to chart your path.
Yeah, what I find bizarre here is in some ways our paths are so different. So I started life as a physicist working for the UK government and the US government, and then gradually sort of came into academia. But my focus for the last 20 odd years has been how as a society do we navigate these incredibly complex technology transitions while retaining the core of what is important to us as individuals and humans, not letting ourselves be swept away either by the technology or by the people that are pulling the strings of technology. So I've been very, very focused on this idea of this intersection between tech and society and the future. And it was really quite fortuitous, this meeting with Jeff. And I work with industry, but I try and sort of bring that human sensibility to it. And suddenly finding somebody who had a very similar sensibility, not as an academic, but as somebody in the business world, I found quite intriguing. But almost all of my work is around thought leadership associated with what does responsible innovation mean? How do you define that? How do you get to the core of what we truly want to build in the future as people? And then how do you navigate the technologies that are coming along from that perspective?
Yeah. And that gets to a question I ask all the time, which is, who is the we?
That's exactly it. Yes. Yeah. And so it's funny. And I grapple with this all of the time. And I'm usually I try quite carefully not just to throw we's in, and somebody always pulls me up when I do, because the answer is we all do. Right. I know we're a very, very pluralistic society, and the we is different according to whether you're talking about individuals, communities, sort of whole countries, and that's part of the complexity of what we navigate.
And so you pulled together this book, and tell us about the fundamental premise, the idea behind the book.
Yeah, so the book was basically setting out to ask if we're building a world where artificial intelligence can seemingly do everything that we thought was important to us, everything that defined us, those transactional things,
Where does that leave us? Do we risk sort of losing ourselves here, or do we need to go back to basics and rethink what it truly means to be human? And then from there, the idea of the book was not to be pro-AI or anti-AI, but basically saying in this evolving world, how do you ensure that you stay true to who you are? How do you develop a pathway where you can thrive as an individual, whether you're a venture capitalist, the CEO of a company, a parent, a teacher, a student, whoever? And from that perspective, I actually think it's a very AI agnostic book. It accepts that we have this landscape, and it's designed to appeal to both the people that are trying to go at 1,000 miles an hour with AI and those that think that really this is troubling them a lot.
Right. And there are these core tenets of the human part that you describe, the curiosity, care, clarity, purpose, and intentional. And in other words, AI still sits there, waits for the prompt, and it's
right.
That makes it not very human because we're always.
But this I think is where things get weird. So on one hand, you can see it as a tool, and you can say, well, how do we use this unbelievably powerful tool in ways which are human forward? And that's where you have to ask questions around care and intentionality and clarity with what you're trying to do, but also it's more than that. And I think we're just getting to discover this. This is a technology that in a very real term messes with our heads. It actually gets into our minds because of the way it uses language. So it's not just a tool. It actually sort of engages with us. And this is where we start talking about the idea of the mirror of AI, which is not ours. It draws from other places. But that's also where you've got to learn how to hold on to what makes you you, both with these ideas of clarity and care and intentionality, but also curiosity. So as you sort of enter the mirror, as you look into the mirror of AI, how do you make sure you're not subsumed by that mirror?
So you mean that you're not the one that's become passive in a way?
Yes. And of course, we had this conversation around a lot of technologies. If you're a passive consumer, the person or the thing or the organization that is charting your pathway is not you. If you're passive, somebody else is making choices for you. And in this case, we've built a machine that is part of making those choices.
And Jeff, I just want to be sure you can hear Andrew. There was some issue with the audio.
I do hear you just fine, Andy, but I haven't heard what Andrew said.
Oh,
I said lots of complimentary
and
things.
Normally we build off each other quite well, so we'll miss that opportunity today unless you can give a short recap.
Well, we were oh, that's interesting. He was going through sort of one of the basic principles is to keep you in the driver's seat essentially when you're using this tool, because it can lead to almost passivity where it's in the driver's seat because you're the mirror issue. And I don't know if you in your thinking about the key points in the book and what you don't want to get across can build forward from that. The idea that how to keep using it actively. By the way, which reminds me of social media generally. On social media, most of the problems when I teach about it or blog about it, I say use these things actively. Don't sit there and wait for Elon's or whoever's algorithms to feed you stuff. Don't just slide down the feed because it's designed that way. Get active. Search for someone who's working on a question you want to work on, and that's where the utility is. So maybe Jeff, from the standpoint of what you're investing in this arena, I assume is related to outcomes that can build a bigger world and ideally a thriving world.
Well, I think the question of active versus passive is certainly very important. And I was gratified in a way to see the Anthropic 2025 economic study that came out about a month ago, which showed that there was a 0.92% correlation between the prompt that you put in or the sophistication of the prompt that you put in and what you receive back, showing that someone that put in a lazy answer and accepted that at face value would work at that level, and someone that was very rigorous, as I think we were in using the book, using the Claude tool to assist us with the book, you get out something completely different. The study also showed that the level of education of the model today was approximately 14.4 years of education, whereas the average human was 13.2. I probably got those numbers slightly mixed up, but the point was the model was already possessing a higher level of average education than the typical user. And so it could be quite easy to become lazy and to just accept what you're given without critical thinking, and not just critical thinking about the project, but I think what we're really trying to get to here, and the concept of agency, and I'm sure is what Andrew spoke about, is the notion of setting out a vision for who you would most like to be. I mean, if it really is true that this can liberate you of many task-related things, if agents can in fact read your email and help you with your calendar and do your expense reports, and I have every assurance, I've seen people do this, watch them talk with only natural language and produce outcomes that show that that's possible. These are very sophisticated people that have invested years in figuring this out, but over time, all of that will be true for all of us. And so that raises the question, well, what would you most like to do? But what would you most like to become? And how can you harness these tools to help you become that version of you that is most empowered? And that does require reflection. It does require persistence and a habit-based approach, a practice of little by little learning these tools and empowering yourself in that way. Are we investing in those kind of things? We're not seeing a lot of them yet. I think we're seeing a lot of things that are more, transactional. Many people are trying to build interoperability layers. For example, the software layer that allows any robot to talk to any other robot. And so we're looking, I think, at layers like that. There's a lot going on in the agentic space now, and that just becomes more and more complex as weeks go by. I was astonished last week to see a post on LinkedIn that showed that, we've all seen how people are using vibe coding to completely replicate something that, took others years to build. In the space of 4 days, one company called FeltSense replicated the entire software code base of every company in the Y Combinator Accelerator program. Someone else who was turned down for a partnership with Google completely replicated the code base of the Google G Suite, Docs and PowerPoint and Google Sheets. Now, of course, they didn't have 1 billion active users, and they didn't have, secure and private and scalable data centers to handle the load. But the fact was the software itself in all these cases was entirely replicable within a matter of days. And that's just unprecedented.
So here we go. That some of the achievements are just astounding. Still, in the book, your website is incredibly useful. I uploaded the book into Grok, which I've been using just because of this path dependency. I started experimenting with Grok early on, and I haven't really used Claude much. And you get into your own pathway, and then it's hard to jump the tracks. You obviously use Claude for the book, in the book, and as a way to move forward. Can you describe a little bit about how that Claude became your partner in doing this project? Maybe back to you, Andrew.
Yes.
I'll try to keep Jeffrey updated through.
Keep Jeff in the loop. Yes. So to start with, we're actually very intentional with using AI with the book, and we came up with a very, very specific protocol. And the reason was we realized that there was an urgency here. The sort of questions we were addressing, people were asking sort of early last year, and we didn't have the luxury of having 12 months, 24 months going through a publisher to get this out. And the only way we could do that was to find a workflow where we worked with an AI. And we actually started working with ChatGPT. And that process was a lot of brainstorming with Jeff and myself and a couple of colleagues, really spending a lot of time producing hundreds of pages of ideas and philosophies and thinking and directions for this, and then putting those into ChatGPT and coming up with an idea for what the book might look like. I was doing this, and I discovered early on that while ChatGPT was technically good, It was not eloquent in any way whatsoever. So when I came to start drafting chapters, they were awful. They were so bad. And at that point, I thought I'd try out Claude, and Claude was a revelation. I guess talk about sort of getting locked into your own tracks. I resonated with the eloquence, the way that it expressed itself. So it was very, very personal there. And from there, we developed a very, very sophisticated workflow that would allow us working with Claude to develop content that was both driven by the AI, but curated by us and very much reflected our voices, our ideas, our philosophies, and what we wanted to achieve. So it's funny, this actually reflects the book itself. We start off the book talking about the mirror moment, where the book is actually based around a series of stories with characters, again, very intentionally, where their experiences lead to the specific tools. And it starts off with this idea of this character having that sort of wake-up moment where the AI they're using seems to know themselves more than they know themselves. And writing the book, I had the same experience where I was reading what was coming back, and not only does it resonate with my work for the last 20 years and my thinking, but there were points when it literally brought me to tears with its eloquence. And that's something that actually deeply disturbs me, that a machine can do that. But that was the sort of relationship we had building it.
Wow. Well, I'm gonna have to try. I'm gonna have to try.
But as you say, it's very, very personal. I mean, I've been actually experimenting with Grok recently, and we were talking before the show. I've been very reticent because of its provenance, but it is a good AI.
Yeah. So Claude is a good. I mean, you can test them and kind of at least take the time to cross-reference them. Are there people now who are, how we have book reviewers and we have music reviewers, who's out there doing a lot of the cross-checking?
That's a good question. I don't know. There are a lot of commentators. So someone like Ethan Mollick, who is this person at Penn State who gets early access to all of these, he writes a lot about them, but I'm not sure I've seen anybody that does the really deep emotional reviews. Sort of this is where it resonated, this is where it was amazing, versus this is where it was clunky. Maybe we need that. Maybe we need AI to do that.
Well, well, right there you go. You can cross-check them. I did something kind of amusing. It gets at this idea of where you keep the human part. This morning, I uploaded the book into Grok AI, and I said, I'm going to demonstrate how to use this book in AI Guide Live on a video podcast with the authors in about 90 minutes. What's a good place to start? And so I could just not be here, and I could just have AI.
It's even scripted it for you.
It was a strong, natural, and engaging way to start your live video podcast in 90 minutes. It keeps things human. It keeps things human, grounded, and true to the spirit of the book. While the recommended opening flow, warm personal hook, 30 to 45 seconds. Start with something like, "Hey, I'm Andy Revkin, blah blah blah." And some of these prompts are good. Follow the I see I could do this. Follow the instructions in this file, and then ask me what I'd like to explore. And there were some good points here. It said, where was it? Well, there was some other. So it's like, and I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to do that. But it is a weird thing, and you say, okay, where in there can I distinguish my own reactions to the book, and what a machine would do.
I've actually got to say, sort of hearing you say this, I struggle with this all the time. I mean, this is my job, sort of pushing the boundaries of these tools. And on one hand, I'm leaning very heavily into these tools. On the other hand, I am preciously jealous of my own human skills and identities. So there are some forms of writing where I will not allow AI to touch it because it's so precious to me.
Yeah. And so, Jeff, in a practical way, again, thinking about the people who come to your salons from the business end or from education or which is a business too. What is the general sense of, well, as I say here, I've and this is true. Grok got this straight on. I feel both excitement and low level dread about the impact on creative work and public discourse. So how do you sort of walk people through, which you do in the book, how to maintain a sense of confidence that the better outcomes will sustain.
Well, I think we're just grappling now with how to try to do that systematically. The chapters themselves are all locally organized. So it's a decentralized model where we partner with local people in their community who want to create this forum for others and bring people together. We suggest the template for the event, but not necessarily the content. And we're about to, for the first time, launch a campaign out into the community suggesting to the organizers that they take on this topic of what it means to be human in the age of AI, or some are calling it AI and human flourishing, and introducing into that the option for them to take this book as a facilitation guide or potentially as a manual, not something we can require, but so it will be interesting to see the diversity of responses. I expect some will say, yeah, that's not what we do. We're here to talk about business. Others, I think, will embrace it thoughtfully. But I do expect, based on experience that Andrew and I had in Phoenix, actually at his space, we did 2 small sessions in anticipation of the launch of the book, where we suspended the normal format of the AI Salon, which was sort of random guest experts coming in and talking about their application of AI to the legal practice, or what AI might mean, for the future of engineering education, and then startups presenting. And instead, we suspended all of that and sat everybody down in a small, intimate forum and presented these ideas, and then invited people to talk. And I think we were both really quite taken with the degree to which people opened up. Some people apparently were quite sharing of their deepest feelings. Some people discussed their faith and how this tapped into their faith, and that they've been, praying on answers to the questions. Some startup founders confessed openly that they knew what they were building was terribly efficient and doing the work of dozens of people, but also aware that meant people could potentially be replaced, and that they didn't quite have an answer for what to do about that, if they had some responsibility towards that, but they were aware of it and grappling with that as well. And I think that if this conversation takes place around the world, I expect something quite similar would happen everywhere. Now, what to do with that, how to unpack that, the book would be a gentle nudge to say, well, if any of this has been useful to you, take these tools. Think of them as things that you can go to when you're in these moments with yourself, asking yourself, what should I do? I'm a manager, I've implemented this tool, and the consequence of it is next quarter's dramatic downsizing. Or I'm a founder and I'm building something that I know is both impactful at the bottom line, but also culturally impactful in a different way on my customer's organization. And how can we all be expanding the circle of care and concern a little bit further down the road to kind of holistically think through those things at the same time, so that we're not just causing a consequence and then letting someone else worry about how to mitigate the outcome, which is, right in your field of sustainability, kind of what happens in, the world of dealing with the environment. First, we create the problem, and then we try to figure it out. So I think it will end up playing out in that way. I'm really optimistic that the response will be positive. I just want to make one final comment. Andrew Maynard was the architect of the way we worked with Claude and the prompt, and it was so sophisticated at its time that today you could say that he basically worked in a way that was later introduced as Claude Cowork. So he used the simple chatbot and did exactly what now, if you were to follow a step-by-step instruction for how to create a Claude Cowork, which was, creating a master folder and creating a number of sub-files, each with a specific set of instructions that directed the model to do a specific thing. That is what Andrew did over a year ago. So I just want to take time to recognize and applaud the sophistication of his thinking, even before the tools were capable of what they are today. I think the outcome of the book today would be even more enhanced with the tools as they are today.
Well, and that's one interesting thing about the way the book is designed. It is it's not exactly a living document, but it creates a structure for how to move forward iteratively, I think.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that's interesting to me is the this focus on basic principles. Like if you're going to pursue a particular track with it, if you have a particular question, how do you maintain your core principles? It seems to be a big part of this. Andrew, can you talk about what you were just credited with, and how how you maintain your own discipline and
Yeah.
working with this interface?
With difficulty. So yes, it's funny. Jeff and I were talking the other day just about this because I've been using Claude Code a lot, and it's sort of Claude Code and Cowork are all sort of bundled into the Mac app these days. And I mentioned how this is such a game changer. And Jeff asked me, do you think the book would have been different if we'd have written it now? Which is the worst possible thing you can ask an author, because the last thing you want to think is, maybe I should have done a 2.0 version of the book and completely sort of changed it. But the reality is things are moving on so fast now that certainly structurally we could have written the book faster and differently now. Whether it would still have the same soul to it, I do not know, because there's definitely, when I talk about soul, I mean sort of something that goes beyond just the words and the transactional nature of it. There was something special that happened there. There was a combination of Jeff and myself and the way we worked with Claude and the whole process. And even the friction in the process, I think, lent to that. So yes, transactionally, you could produce a book like this faster now. Whether it would still have that soul, that sort of humanity to it, I don't know.
That's interesting. You mentioned the word friction, and this gets to one issue that people talk about with AIs, where they're too felicitous. They're too there isn't enough friction. Is that one of the benefits of having two humans involved, as distinct from just one and an AI? Maybe Jeff.
Yeah. So you asked, how do you keep principles involved? And I want to go back to an anecdote that for me was really formative in setting the spark for this in motion. And it was probably April of 2023. It was right around the time when my partners and I had decided to raise this fund to invest in artificial intelligence. And I went to an old friend who I thought might be interested in investing in the fund. And his first question was, yeah, but who's building these models and what are their values? And in addition to providing you useful factual answers, what responsibility does the model have to guide you towards being a better person, to guide us towards a more compassionate world? Is that not incumbent upon the people with such power? And that led into month after month after month of chat-based, SMS-based, back and forth discussion between myself and this old friend who's deeply inspired by the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, I'll mention. And we ended up building a Buddhist-based chatbot using a simple available tool, 150 PDFs thrown in, and there it was, right? So later that led to having dinner with a gentleman called Thupten Jinpa, who's one of the principal endorsers on the back of the book, and has had the honor for the last 40 years of being the translator to and personal interpreter for the Dalai Lama. And what they have assured me as well, and I also know firsthand that, the Pope has called in senior advisors who are investors and owners of these companies to ask, what does this mean about what it means to be human for a 2,000 plus year old lineage-based, verbal transmission-based tradition? And it's clear that everyone is asking the same question. And so for me, it did take me back to the notion of a practice. So I'll confess, I've been practicing a version of yoga for 25 years and with it some Buddhist practices. And I really aligned with the book in the 1990s, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I think millions did based on its sales and growth into a major company. The notion that the version of you that you want to become in the future is something that you have to architect day after day, week after week, year after year. If, Bill building a better relationship with your estranged father, for example, is a goal, then you need to have it on your calendar every week to call dad. There have to be concrete steps, and that is a practice that forms into a habit. And so that is very much present in the book, which is to say that we all know what these guides are. We have available to us these longstanding sources of wisdom, and there are many ways to successfully form habits. Think of this in the same way. Imagine that future state that you want to be in and make a habit out of regularly coming back to, how do I use AI to become that? In that way, it's empowering, but for it to be empowering, it's a choice that ultimately rests with you. It's not necessarily the goal, or it won't be the responsibility of the people making the model to turn you into that person. In fact, in most cases, they're looking to turn you into a user. And that may imply something different, not necessarily something pernicious, but not necessarily something uplifting either.
Right. Hey, Andrew, what are your thoughts on that?
Very much so. And I think that this ties in with this idea of friction. There's something about sort of being human, finding ourselves, expressing ourselves, creating meaning and value that requires a journey, and journey requires pushing back against something. So if you take all of the friction away, there's no way you can actually create that value. And I think exactly as Jeff said, I mean, that sort of comes out in this idea of practice. It comes out in the idea of the tools in the book, that you can thrive in an age of AI incredibly powerfully, but you don't thrive by thinking that the ideal is to remove all the friction so you can go as fast as possible. You thrive by finding those things where you're actually creating value by pushing against things, by working with other people, by building relationships. And to me, that was very important. And coming back to a question about working with Jeff, Jeff was a pleasure to work with, but there's something about working with another human rather than just a machine that actually adds to that creative friction.
Yeah. Jeff's had some technical issues with not hearing you. Oh, here he's back, I think. Actually, Andrew, say something. Let's see if Jeff can hear you. I'm curious.
Jeff, can you hear me? No, he can't.
No. Oh my gosh, this has never happened.
It's tremendously disappointing because I always love the chance to talk with Andrew.
I've been taking notes in the chat. So he was basically talking about the value, again, that value of the friction and pushback, and making that somehow part of how we interact with these devices is part of that.
Well, what he demonstrated through the approach to using AI was the very thing that we're talking about, which is why it was indispensable to work with AI. If you're going to write a book about human interaction with AI, of course, you have to use AI, or it wouldn't be a very legitimate undertaking. But starting with the end in mind, again, that's one of the Covey principles, right? How do I want to use this? What is the outcome I'm looking for? That puts me in the driver's seat.
But hold on right there for a second, because I think that gets at something I was just going to ask about. So many of our norms as humans, and as companies, and as communities, is envisioning an end, meaning the end, but the end being a product, or like on the environment, a lake that is protected. Then you sit by the shore and you sip your martini and go, hey, we protected the lake. In my 40 years on the sustainability questions, including the whole arena, not just climate, it became clear to me at a certain point that a hyper-focus on endpoints, whether it's a certain parts per million of carbon dioxide, or a certain population number or whatever, misses that the end is really just designing a system that works. The end is the system, not the end of the road, and its relationships. And it's I specifically started talking about this years ago, is getting away from numbers like 350 or 2 degrees or whatever, and then when you realize there's not a lot of, we always miss those numbers. What do you work on? And you work on system design. How do you facilitate people interacting productively? How do you facilitate good ideas meaning thriving, dominating over dangerous ideas, etc. And then you can kind of feel more comfortable that you've done your work. And I think that's a big part of what you're getting at with this book. But that leads me back to the we part. The part of that we question is who's designing these systems. I mean, it's a bunch of men in Silicon Valley with no minders. With maybe a few of them go to a Buddhist retreat, but it still feels like there's no overarching potential to rein in or consider the wider needs of society. And that, when you think about the tools we're using every day, Facebook and the others, it seems so hard to envision how that can really shift toward being a public good, to retaining the public good along with the private benefits. So how does that play out? You talk as a VC and as running these salons, and you're dealing with people. I would imagine deep down, still for most of them, it's about money more than about these grand issues. But I don't know if maybe I'm wrong. That'd be good. I feel happy if I'm wrong.
Well, definitely the purpose behind doing the salons has shifted to align, at least for me, in terms of my intention for the outcomes of my efforts and the things that I can do to influence outcomes. The reason I'm doing it has shifted to being much more aligned with this book than it necessarily is about the transactional value. It has to be both, and that's what keeps me going on doing that. I do see in the conversations sort of a bifurcation. I mean, you can go on LinkedIn and find a lot of people in the technology industry, including employees of the very large companies that you're talking about, Microsoft, OpenAI, Anthropic. You'll see that they have people on staff that are asking these questions and writing about these things and participating in policy fora and so on. So it's not like that they're not cognizant of it, but the underlying business model remains the same, which is to, grow users, to grow scale, to become the dominant player, to tap into long-term rent, and these conversations are maybe guiding that or influencing that, but certainly not replacing that. I have a very limited keyhole. I can look through the keyhole and see things, and what I do see is certainly there is a very small group of people who eventually come to know one another. They find out who one another are, that are really at the cutting edge, the people that are building these things. And they have an extended network outside of their organizations of people they consult with that influence them, that say, hey, why didn't you do this? Or I'm sitting here using your model and it doesn't do this, you should do that. And so I think, the ability to influence them does occur, but likely just within the space of other people like them that they're running into that influence them through personal networks. At least that's what I observe. And yes, from what I see, including at my firm, that and there's nothing wrong with it, because this is what the firm is constituted for, is the principal focus on how do we extract the most profit from this. And it does seem to be a separate conversation, the one that we're having here, and how do most people benefit. We tried to demonstrate that through the stories, the fiction in the book, to create vignettes of people in roles like founders or investors or implementers of AI, and show the inner dilemmas they were facing as they tried to decide which future path to take. Was it one that purely favored profit and growth, or was it one that took a different approach that maybe treated people better, and in Silicon Valley speak, resulted in lower churn and greater loyalty and perhaps greater customer retention? But there's no way to prove that will be the outcome. So it really does come down to a personal or a values-based choice that an individual founder or investor or board is going to have to make, to say, we're going to choose this other way that somehow favors humanity in a way that we think is important. and we're willing to ride it out and see what the consequences are. But there haven't been any experiments to date to show whether these are valid alternatives or the latter one is just wishful thinking.
Well, that gets back to, and Andrew, I'm going to hear from you in a second, but there's a line in the book about the urgency factor here. This isn't just another technology cycle that we can gradually adapt to. We have perhaps a 5-year window, maybe less, to shape how humanity and AI evolve together. And, that's very different than the singularity predictions and stuff. So that, I don't know how that works out. I still think that the power structures are going to lead us to a place of more regrets and also this is not a regret that you can walk back from if things get carried too far. And there's something I heard at the Vatican when I was there in 2014 for a meeting on sustainable humanity, sustainable nature, our responsibility. There was a cardinal from El Salvador, Maradiaga, who opened the proceedings and said, nowadays mankind seems to be a technical giant and an ethical child. And I still find that dynamic really troubling and very true in terms of where we're poised at. Andrew, maybe you can weigh in on this.
Yeah, so this actually gets to the heart of my work and the conundrums I face. And part of the challenge is we have both an emerging situation, we have constraints, and some of those constraints are how we work as humans, our sort of how we think, how we behave, and you can't change that overnight, and you can't change the world just by saying people need to behave differently, because it's just embedded in our very nature. And also you can't change how society works. We've built a largely market-driven capitalistic society, and of course, hopefully that's not the only model, but it's the predominant model at the moment, and that carries things forward. And you can't just say we need to change this overnight and everything changes. The world just doesn't change in that way. And yet at the same time, when you begin to chart out where these transformative technologies are taking us, and it's not only artificial intelligence, there are a whole suite of them, it is very easy to see how we could end up with a disastrous future, not because we're developing something like AGI or superintelligence, but because we simply do not have the maturity as a species to be able to navigate these. And I think that quote from the Vatican about us being ethical children is very, very adept. We're now facing a situation where the power we have at our fingertips far exceeds our understanding and maturity of how to use that wisely for the good of humanity. And as a result, I am conflicted in what I write about, what I teach, how I work with my students, how I work with others, because I do feel very, very strongly that we have this small window. And yet I know for a fact that you can't change anything just by shouting at people and saying, you've got to be different. You've got to work with what you've got. And so my hope is through sort of things like this book and sort of nudging people and sort of introducing different ways of thinking and seeing the world, you can begin to make a difference. And I'm not quite sure what else to do here. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge that maybe this won't get us to where we need to be as a species.
Now, is that an arena where the AI, or maybe the Buddhist AI that Jeff was talking about, can rescue us from our own worst nature?
That's a Jeff question.
Jeff, I think you can hear now. I'm so sorry. I should have specified that StreamYard doesn't like Chrome. I mean Safari. I'm so sorry.
Well, it's been an interesting challenge. It's kept me on my toes a little bit more than usual, but I'm back with Chrome. Thank you. The question was whether.
Well, we were talking about when I was at the Vatican. There was this challenge articulated by our Cardinal Maradiaga that. We're technical giants and ethical children at the same time, and that's not a good mix when you have a fast-changing technology like this one. And I was asking, well, maybe AI can come to the rescue and provide us with if we want it, but we still have to sort of want to accept that kind of tugging. Can you, whether it's building in sort of governors within the AI, which we've all heard about and talked about, or whether it's a system that's kind of a red team, blue team within the AI, and where it's saying this is a danger zone or not?
Well, it's a really interesting question. I have a couple of friends who often joke that much of what drives the technology industry, you could see through the lens of the 7 deadly sins. You know, and there's so many times when you see people building things that they're building it out of the fascination with, can it be built?
Right.
Can I find a way to never wait in line again in my life? You see many young people today who have grown up with mobile devices. Their principal preoccupation is how to avoid lines, how to have everything that you possibly want delivered instantly, or you show up and you know, hop the queue and what you've ordered and your table is waiting. Of course, that's wonderful on an individual level, but what does that do to the rest of the experience of everyone in the place? Well, we've all experienced that at Starbucks. You walk in and you're waiting there 20 minutes. You're the guest on premise, and everyone else who ordered mobile or the drivers are showing up and breezing right past you, right? That's sort of a, you know, an analog for a world where people only think about themselves when they're building something and not about everyone. And so I think, indeed, if you ask a question of a model, how do I build something that has this benefit for me, but also takes into account and equally meets the needs of other people, I think you would get answers that would guide you in that direction. The question is, what is prompting us to ask the question that way? And that is not a question that AI can provide us unless you specifically choose to use a model that's trained to prompt you that way. Andy,
Right.
There's something you missed. It seems you may be leaving the collective benefit out of the conversation. Would you like me to show you a way? Now, that could be interesting, but that would ultimately be someone's choice to work with that model and not another one. But do I think a model like that should exist? Could exist, certainly.
And does that get to, you know, when I think about corporate norms and what boards of corporations think about, they talk about fiduciary responsibility and like, and there was a point when, it was during the whole divestment movement, you know, get companies to divest, where you villainize companies basically as part of your environmental campaign. And you know, I kept thinking, well, isn't there a way to get companies to re-examine what their basic principles are? So when they think fiduciary responsibility, what do those words really mean? Who's the fiduciary? And does it include these wider societal factors? That seems to be a part of what would have to happen in the end.
I really think, and we've talked about this briefly, Andrew and I, that we're probably headed towards a space at some point in the future where something equivalent of the Sustainable Development Goals is arrived at, where people come together as stakeholders and say that maybe there should be these guiding principles in how we use that, but it'll probably take a long time to get there. And by then, most of the stakes at the table will probably be decided anyway.
Yeah.
So
sorry.
I was going to say, I think there's another challenge here as well. And that is so much of what we're seeing is being driven by ideology. So it's not just making money. If you look at the big tech companies, they're driven by people who have a very, very specific vision of the future. And I would say in many cases, it's a very naive vision, a very flawed vision, but it's this vision that drives them. This is what they're trying to build. You look at someone like Dario Amodei or Elon Musk or others. It's not the money. It's creating the future that somehow has got locked in their heads. And that ideology is far harder to shake than just the profit motive.
Right. That gets to the who is the we.
That's exactly it. But it also, when we get to the who is the we, it also begs the question, each of us individually in those different communities, what responsibility do we have to try and sort of steer the ship or nudge the ship? And what power do we have to do that? And I don't know there, because you look at the long history of the sustainability and the eco movement. This has been part of that idea that sort of mobilization at the individual and community level can somehow nudge the ship. And I'm not quite sure how successful that's been.
Yeah, and this ship is a very different one than
it is.
Driving an EV or changing your light bulbs.
Yeah,
because we're so embedded and feels there's a lot of powerlessness that comes with our access to the internet, which seemed to be such a wonderful humanizing tool. I do want to bring up, if we have time, we have David Eisenberg, who I've known for decades, who was one of the early AT&T Bell Labs telecom, internet folks, and he just yesterday on this listserv about stuff like this, he posted not a new question, what good is AI? But he kind of walked through the basic principles. Whereas the internet holds the promise of connecting every person on the planet so that each person could speak and every person who wants to can hear, and whereas Google holds the promise of organizing all the world's information so that every person can find all the information they need. But AI holds no such grand promise for humanity, at least none that I can see. Sure, it makes some things easier, but its main function seems to be providing ways to substitute for functions that are or used to be human. Furthermore, like the internet and other technologies, there's significant daily benefits, but the use and misuse of AI presents unique and unprecedented existential threats to humanity. So I ask, am I right? Do others see? He asked this of this big techie conversation. Do others see it this way? Is there something I'm missing? And let's not just say, is the internet good or bad? Of course, it's both. Is there any fresh notion that emerges in thinking about this question this way?
So I would actually go back to where we started with you using Suno, which is a great example. So you look at Suno as a way of just creating sort of oral mush. It can create something which is trivially sort of interesting, but actually has no depth. But then you plus Suno created something that actually had some degree of humanity about it. Right. And that, I think, is both the challenge and the conundrum. So the challenge is this absolutely is an existential threat to who we are, our identity individually and as a society, and even as corporations. Because if we passively let AI just do stuff, it's going to swamp us. But within that, there is absolutely the core of actively working out how to work with it and utilize it so we can be more than we are through it. And to me, that always comes down to this question of maturity. We can't stop this tool developing for many different reasons, but how do we develop the maturity and the wisdom to use it in ways that truly enhance who we are and enhance society rather than just allowing it to sweep us away?
Right. Yeah. And boy, I guess education will come into this too. And we're all being educated, whether we're adults or elementary school kids.
Yes, which is a whole other can of worms.
Which is why your book is useful.
Right.
Yeah, I do think it's a great way to walk through some of this, these points, and I hope if folks who've been watching go to find the book, just Google for The Art of Being Human. There is that website, aiandtheartofbeinghuman.com, and even the website itself is really valuable. Jeff, I don't know, going forward, it might be fun to do another session down the line on some particular aspect of how this relates to a particular community problem, or, one of your salon situations. We can kind of do a deeper dive on things. But if there's one point you want to leave people with before we cut out, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's that there's a narrative arc in the book that starts with where we as individuals are today. We're facing the situation, the one that we've described. We have a choice, and the book guides you through stories and tools that first you start out using individually. Later, you have a choice whether to introduce them into smaller circles, maybe within your organization or family. and ultimately to make a choice to try to create what we call the micro circle of beginning to meet regularly in your own small salon style discussion groups, just as you might imagine happening during a resistance movement to a war, where or some other form of imposed control, where people want to get together and talk about what this means for them. I happen to be helping facilitate that happening around the world, but there's no reason why everyone who wants to have a voice in this can't get a small group of their own together and move themselves down the trajectory of understanding what is this, how is it working for us, what do we want that's different, and until we can articulate what we want that's different and why, and until we can come together in a collective voice, then probably in the same way with the environmental movement, our ability to influence outcomes is limited. And so the book does take us on that arc where hopefully at the end, people decide, I do want to be empowered here. I do want to involve others and start to have a voice.
Well, that sounds like a great call to action. And I think we all can find ways to use this, whether you go to the website or the book itself, which again, there's a version that's downloadable and free of charge, something that we all should get busy and try to integrate into our lives within the next 5 years. This is all playing out, whether you're involved or not, and finding a way to make yourself part of it is a really important task going forward. Well, I really appreciate your being here. Sorry about the technical issues. I should have mentioned the Safari thing. I usually do, and I screwed up on that. But there's lots more to figure out here. And I want to see if this is. Now I was going to play one more song, but
please do.
It's too hard to set it up. So thank you. This was a great beginning to a conversation, and with more to come. This is Sustain What? This has been an hour with Jeff Abbott and with Andrew Maynard about this book, which lays out practices through which you can retain the best of being human, while you accentuate the possibilities using these devices and these models and technologies that are they really are. What's his name? There was a writer who called us divine and felonious. People are both at the same time, and navigating those aspects of ourselves doesn't change whether we have a super powerful machine at our disposal or not. And this is Sustain What? And thanks everybody. Have a good weekend ahead. Get in touch with me through the scrolling distracting bar at the bottom if you have ideas for further shows or feedback, and go to revkin.substack.com, and onward we go. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Thank you.
And just hold on one second.